Hello literature connoisseurs. Let's begin chapter 25 of Left Behind. The chapter begins with Nikolai greeting each person there at the table in the meeting. Todd C. gets promoted to being the one in charge of the Great Britain sector. Carpathia then repeats the same title to the financial advisor next to Todd C. This gets overlooked as Nikolai makes a mistake, but this is odd since with his photographic memory he is said to not make mistakes. He then gives titles to all of the remaining delegates. There is an awkward moment when Nikolai gets to Buck. Nikolai tells Buck that he is part of the team and is given certain rights and privileges. Buck is again confused and thinks that Nikolai is also confused. Remembering that Buck has just converted, so if Nikolai were the Antichrist, wouldn't he know that and that he no longer has influence over him? Nikolai attempts to hypnotize Buck, but we are told it fails. Buck remains silent as he believes Nikolai is evil. Nikolai makes him feel nauseating to be near him and showing him affection. Buck realizes everyone else, even Hattie, are under his spell by the lure of the positions they have been promised. The authors call this being hypnotized, but in reality it is greed. Being hypnotized would put them at Nikolai's will without the promises of power. Using greed and hypnotism is a better explanation than just hypnotism alone. Logic and reason are something the authors abhor. Buck thinks about much danger he is in, and had he not converted because people prayed for him, he would be no different than those at the meeting. Not sure how he knew anyone prayed for him, but why worry about details now? Insert eye roll here. Buck blames himself for introducing Hattie to Nikolai once he learns that she quit her job to be Nikolai's personal assistant. Nikolai turns to Stonegal as he smiles knowingly at Nikolai. He expects to be given an elevated position, but Nikolai demeans him by suggesting he is merely part of the team. Enraged, Stonegal pulls away, but Nikolai counters that he was having some sport at Stonegal because he would understand. Nikolai states that he is about to give them all an object lesson about his leadership. He calls over the security officer. He asks him to take out his gun, then shows it to everyone. Stonegal gets angrier and angrier while this goes on. After showing the group, Nikolai asks the officer to give him the gun. Stonegal protests by calling Nikolai a child. Nikolai asks Todd and Stonegal to rise from their seats. He then uses the gun to force Stonegal to kneel in front of him. Nikolai begins to monologue his plans as if he is a supervillain. He tells them that after he kills Stonegal he will tell them what they will remember. Nikolai also mentioned that Todd C. will die because of his close range to Stonegal. He says it fulfills his promise to Buck that he would deal with them. Nikolai fires and both men fall onto each other dead. Although the authors said that their bodies are intertwined. Seems more of their love of Robert Redford innuendo. Carpathia tells the story that Stonegal was living with guilt because he believed he caused the deaths of 2 people. He rushed the stage and disarmed the security officer. He shot himself, killing Todd C. in the process. Nikolai went around and asked everyone what happened, and they repeated back the story he told them. Buck began sweating because if he did not repeat the story Nikolai said, he feared he'd be killed next. He prayed, and the feelings he came up with seemed to tell him to remain silent. He feels grateful that God is with him in this time of evil. The trouble is the only thing he feels is feelings. As mentioned, feelings can be wrong. There are Christians that truly believed that God told them to marry a certain person, but in the end their feelings were wrong. The marriages ended in divorce. Feelings are not a pathway to truth. Because feelings, much like beliefs, can be felt or believed with all your heart, with all your soul if one exists, and with all your mind and still be wrong. You need something more. This comes from the book Lectures in Systematic Theology by Thiessen. Even an honest Christian, if one exists, must admit this. Nikolai finally reaches Buck, and Buck pretends to be overcome with emotions that he cannot speak. This allows Nikolai to assume what he wants to. Satisfied, seemingly, Nikolai moves in to the security officer to get his opinion. Buck leaves after exchanging business cards with police and returns to his office to write the complete story of what happens. His boss calls and demands to know why Buck was not at the Carpathia meeting. Buck says he was there, but his boss doesn't believe him. Buck prays again, asking God for help, but God seems clueless and doesn't answer. Funny things how feelings will do that to you. He wants to call his new cult friends to get advice when God won't answer him, but he gets pulled along by everyone insisting he never showed up at the press conference. Scene changes to Bruce, Rayford, and Chloe as they watch the press conference looking for Buck. They see Hattie but doubt that it is actually her for some reason. They learn about Hattie and hope Buck was not lured into Nikolai's plot. It gets rehashed again that Buck needs God's protection against Nikolai. The same God that seems to be awfully silent all of a sudden. Scene changes back to Buck as his boss storms into his office. Buck now believes that God is real and believes in his faith because everyone at the conference forgot who he was. He can think of no other explanation for why he was not hypnotized by Nikolai. If you ignore the obvious and what's in front of you, then it can seem like there are no other explanations. To quote Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, fiction can be fun, but the reference section is much more enlightening. It's not surprising because Christianity is based on 7 fallacies as its foundations. It's no wonder that they cannot think of anything else except a fallacious God as their explanation. Buck gets demoted and is forced to work in Chicago. This sets him up to be part of the church and tribulation force there, as well as being with Chloe. Insert eye roll. Buck calls the church to tell them the news that he wants to join their childish force team. This ends chapter 25 of Left Behind and concludes the book. Thank Bob for small favors. Next begins Childish Force, Tribulation Force, which is by far the worst out of the books in the series. Before we start the next book, I'll be doing a brief summary of this book and giving my thoughts on it as a whole. See you next time.